a mask with a beak, stuffed with herbs and flowers. To us it looks absurd, theatrical, almost comic. But in plague-stricken Europe, it was deadly serious. This costume, long dark coat, round glass eyes, a grotesque bird's beak, was the frontier between life and death. Medicine, ritual, superstition, theater, and yet, it protected no one. The Black Death first tore through Europe in the 14th century, and plague returned in waves for centuries. Cities reeked with the smell of corpses and burning pitch. People blamed the air itself, miasma, the foul breath of disease. To survive, doctors armed themselves not only with knowledge but with masks. Strange, talismanic masks. By the 17th century, the most infamous design had appeared, the beaked mask. Its leather beak curved down like a carrion bird's. Glass lenses gleamed in its sockets, and beneath it all, doctors packed dried herbs, vinegar-soaked sponges, even ground camphor or cloves. The idea was simple. If plague traveled through poisoned air, then scented air might purify it. The doctor breathed through a perfumed filter, carrying a private garden of protection. But here's the truth. The herbs did nothing. The mask may have blocked smells, but not plague. The doctor remained as vulnerable as his patient. The protection was illusion. And still, the mask mattered. It reassured the public. It transformed the doctor into a symbol, a figure larger than life. Cloaked in leather, holding a staff to prod the sick from a distance, the plague doctor was half physician, half grim reaper, a walking omen that the Black Death was near. For those who saw him, the image was unforgettable. Imagine the narrow streets of 17th century Rome or Paris, the smell of rot heavy in the air. Then, around the corner, this tall, dark figure, a faceless bird, its glass eyes unblinking, its beak thrust forward. He was healer, but he looked like a carrion eater circling the dying. Stranger still, the costume itself was not ancient tradition, but invention. Sources trace it to Charles de Lorme, physician to Louis X of France, around 1619. He designed a complete suit, waxed leather coat, boots, gloves, hat, and the beaked mask. In theory, it was rational, a sealed garment, a filter against air. In practice, it became theater. The uniform spread across Europe, less as effective medicine than as a recognizable icon of the plague. And the herbs inside? They were chosen not just for scent, but for symbolism. Roses and carnations for purity, mint for freshness, camphor for cleansing, myrrh for sacred power. The mask was a mobile altar of fragrance, part science, part magic. Doctors did not only treat, they performed a ritual of protection. Yet while they believed the air was their enemy, the real killer lurked elsewhere. The fleas of rats, carrying Yersinia pestis. The beak was powerless against them. Behind the mask, the doctor inhaled his perfumed air, while death crept on tiny legs across the straw at his feet. The irony was cruel. The costume promised safety, but became a shroud. Many plague doctors died swiftly, despite their masks and staffs. Their families often abandoned them. Cities hired them as expendables. And so the bird mask became not a shield, but a sign of doom. Still, it endured, because fear needed a symbol. The mask made invisible death visible. It gave a face to the plague, a costume to chaos. In a world rotting with corpses, the bird-faced doctor stood as both comfort and curse. The beaked mask was only part of the costume. To complete the image, plague doctors wore a long, waxed leather coat, gloves, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. Every inch of skin was covered. every seam sealed with wax or tallow. In theory, this created a protective barrier. In reality, it turned the doctor into a sealed furnace, sweating inside his armor of leather, the smell of his own body mixed with the herbs in the beak, creating a private stench as suffocating as the plague outside. And then there was the staff. Plague doctors carried a wooden cane, not only as a walking stick, but as a tool. They used it to prod patients, lift the bed sheets, even keep desperate crowds at bay. It was a symbol of distance, a weapon of separation. The doctor could touch without touching, treat without risking the intimacy of skin. To the sick, it must have felt less like healing than like being handled from afar, as though they were already corpses. But the mask and costume did more than cover the body. They reshaped the doctor into something else, a creature that was not quite human. The blank glass eyes, the curved beak, the stiff leather coat. He was faceless, voiceless, depersonalized. When he entered a plague house, he brought not warmth or comfort, but the cold theater of ritual. And this mattered, because plague was not only a disease, it was terror. Entire neighborhoods emptied overnight. Families sealed their dead in houses. Bells tolled without pause. In such chaos, people craved symbols. The doctor's mask was less about medicine than psychology. It gave form to the fight against plague. The bird-faced doctor was a sentinel, a visible sign that someone at least was trying to resist death. Still, the mask frightened as much as it comforted. Children screamed at the sight. For many, the arrival of the bird mask meant that death was already in the street, already in the house. The costume became a harbinger of doom. It blurred into folklore. The plague doctor as carrion bird, scavenger, almost demonic. The herbs within the beak reflected this dual nature, science and superstition bound together. Some believed the plants purified the air. Others thought they repelled demons. Vinegar-soaked sponges were said to kill corruption. Even the shape of the beak carried echoes of the natural world. Like a bird pecking at decay, the doctor became a symbol of plague feeding on the living. Yet for all its grim theater, the costume spread widely. From Italy to Germany, from France to England, the bird mask became part of the collective image of plague. It appeared in prints, woodcuts, carnival masks. Even when real doctors abandoned it, the image lingered, part memory, part myth. And while the mask could not save lives, it did alter how people understood disease. It made plague visible, external, almost tangible. To see the doctor was to know the invisible air was poisoned. To see his staff was to know the sick must not be touched. The mask was failure as medicine, but success as symbol. But here's the darker truth. The costume was also a contract. Cities hired plague doctors not to cure, but to count the dying, to record the infected, to witness the collapse. They were bureaucrats of death, disguised in bird masks. The beak was not only a filter, it was an official seal, a badge of office in a kingdom ruled by pestilence. By the late 17th century, the plague mask had become more than a uniform. It was an emblem of fear itself. The streets of Rome, Venice, or Paris remembered the sight of those beaked figures moving silently through alleys heavy with death. Even when plague waned, the image persisted, etched into memory, into art, into nightmares. The costume, ironically, outlived its medical purpose. Doctors came to understand that plague was not carried by poisoned air, but by fleas and rats. The beak, the herbs, the vinegar, none of it mattered. But the mask lingered in culture, becoming a ghost long after its utility had vanished. In Venice, it even slipped into carnival. The bird-faced mask became a grotesque joke, a memory repurposed into theater. Revelers wore it not to heal, but to mock death, to turn the terror of plague into parody. What once symbolized doom became entertainment, a reminder that fear itself could be worn as costume. Psychologically, the mask reveals something profound about the age. The Renaissance and early modern world were obsessed with appearances, with symbols, with rituals to hold back chaos. Medicine was still half superstition, half science. To wear the beak was to enact control, even if that control was illusion. It was a denial of helplessness, a way to say, we can resist, even if we cannot cure. Yet behind the mask, the truth was harsher. Plague doctors were often despised, distrusted, treated as scavengers of the dying. Many were poorly trained, hired cheaply, abandoned by their cities once the crisis passed. They wore leather armor and perfumed beaks, but few survived long. The mask was a shroud, and many who wore it ended up buried with their patients. And still, the mask endures. Today, it has become a cultural icon, a symbol of plague, pestilence, the grotesque. It appears in horror films, video games, Halloween costumes. It fascinates because it is both absurd and terrifying, a perfect fusion of theater and death. But to remember it truly is to remember a paradox. The plague mask was never protection. It was performance. It was ritual in the face of terror, theater in the face of annihilation. It reassured the living even as it failed to save the dying. That is why it lingers. Not because it worked, but because it captured, in leather and glass, the human need to make death visible, to give chaos a face. The bird mask of the plague doctor is a relic of fear, a costume of hope and failure, of science and superstition. It tells us that in the darkest times, people reach for symbols, even if those symbols are useless. And so we remember the mask, not as medicine, but as mirror. A reflection of a world where survival was uncertain, and where the line between healing and theater blurred into one. A mask that promised life and became the face of death.